on Sunday for this conversation, which is wonderful. Welcome. My name is Jennifer Bright. I'm the social justice coordinator here at the church. Folks in the back. Can folks in the back hear okay? Is the sound level all right? Okay. Wow, I'm really amazed at how many people are here this afternoon. I think it's a testament to how urgently people want to have a conversation about this topic. And since we said we would open one up, John and I know, have both been hearing from people about your particular insights, as well as the very particular blog slash book slash video slash podcast that we have to look at, because it totally incorporates the whole terrible thing. So I know people are coming with ideas about what the problem is. Some of you are probably coming with a lot of information because you've been reading or because you've been living an aspect of this in a way that is very profound in your life. Some of you might be coming with less information and more of a sense of, I don't know where to begin. So what we wanted to do today is start to create a space for this conversation, a container, which will continue next week. This particular piece today is presentational. We'll have some audience interaction, but you get to talk next week. So if you talk this week, it's going to be like, think of it as yelling at your television set, right? We're kind of presenting something. Next week, we have like 6 whole hours that you all can just talk all you want. But what we want to do today is create a container of kind of a common vocabulary for thinking about what happened, what's happening now, what we might do about it. There is no one right story. As John said this morning, this is such a complicated mess that we're in that I'm betting everybody here has a story about how we got here and what it means. So we're going to tell a couple of those just by way of creating a map of the landscape, which is not going to be perfect, but will hopefully, we think, be helpful. I would like to start actually with a reading from Franklin Roosevelt. For too many of us, the political equality we once had was meaningless in the face of economic inequality. A small group had concentrated into their own hands an almost complete control over other people's property, other people's money, other people's labor, and other people's lives. For too many of us, life was no longer free, liberty no longer real. Men could no longer follow the pursuit of happiness. The royalists of the economic order have conceded that political freedom was the business of the government, but they have maintained that economic slavery is nobody's business. They granted that the government could protect the citizen and his right to vote, but they deny that the government could do anything to protect the citizen in his right to work and his right to live. Today, we stand committed to the proposition that freedom is no half and half affair. If the average citizen is guaranteed equal opportunity in the polling place, he must have equal opportunity in the marketplace. These economic royalists complain that we seek to overthrow the institutions of America. What they really complain of is that we seek to take away their power. 1936. So part of what we want to do today is, as I said, create kind of a map. And the reason we want to do that is you can't act to change something unless you have some theory of cause and effect, right? Unless you have a belief about what causes something else, then you're acting at random. And I think that's part of what makes this particular set of problems feel so complicated is it's hard to tease out cause and effect. So we don't have the answers to that, but what we want to do is, again, paint that map. Let you, those of you who are coming back next week or will come to future conversations, we don't know where this will go, let you think about what is your belief about cause and effect, and therefore what is your belief about what levers could be pushed to change things. And that's really the purpose of today, is to give everybody some food for thought. You already have a lot of it, I know, to think about cause and effect, and to come back next week or in another avenue of your life feeling more prepared to take action on problems that seem too enormous to act on sometimes. So, without further ado, we have different segments. We were sort of thinking of this as This American Life. Does anybody ever listen to This American Life? And they have chapters. So chapter 1, the first couple chapters actually, are going to be presented by Nick Barnard. Nick is a member of the congregation and a member of the Social Justice Steering Committee, and actually got this whole thing going because he came to me in October and said, I feel like we should do something. We should have a conversation, a teach-in, which is what we ended up calling this. So he's been working very hard on this, and he is going to start us off with chapter 1, Animal Farm. We're all created equal, but we're sure not living that way.
Thank you, Jennifer, for getting us started. So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about inequality to start off with. And to do that, I'm going to need 5 volunteers from the audience. So raise your hand or, okay, aisle, go ahead, green, all the way in the back. And I think I've got a couple more. While you're coming up, thank you. And while you're coming up, we'll go ahead and let's talk about some examples of income. Just shout them out.
Let's get over a little bit.
Okay.
Okay, come on up.
Income, some examples of income that you have. Or working, salary, great. What other? Social Security, excellent. Pensions are great fun. Also, we have interest from our checking account, savings account. I get a nice extra bit of money from BECU every month on that, and I really appreciate that. And so we all have different types of income that we get. And so when economists talk about the U.S. population, they usually talk about them in quintiles or fifths of the population. And what they go ahead and do to do that is they line the entire population up in order, from the lowest income to the highest income. It's a really long line. And they divide that into 5 equal parts. And so what we're going to go ahead and see is what happened to the incomes during 2 periods of economic growth. 1947 to 1979, and then 1979 to 2009. So each of our volunteers here represents a quintile or a fifth of the U.S. population, and they're going to go ahead and step forward or back based on whether their income gained or declined. So each step is going to go ahead and represent 5% change. So for example, 2 steps forward would equal an income gain of 10%. And this is for family income, so it's not just individuals, but it's household units. So the lowest, bottom 20%, is going to go ahead and take 6 steps forward, please. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There we go. So the second quintile is going to go ahead and take 5 steps forward. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There we go. The middle quintile is going to take 5.5 steps forward, please. And you don't have to sit there like this at the end. So you should be, yeah, there we go, a little bit in front of Debbie. And the fourth quintile is going to go ahead and take 6 steps forward. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And the highest quintile is actually going to go ahead and take 5 steps forward. There we go. And so this is what things look like between 1947 and 1979, and also up on the screen right now, it's also in graphical format. So let's go ahead and take a look at what happened between 1979 and 2009. So if you can all step back to starting points. Great. And so the lowest quintile, the bottom 20%, took 1.5 steps backwards. There we go. A little more half a step. There we go. No falling over. You might feel like it. The second quintile actually took 1 step forward. Okay. The middle quintile took 2 steps forward. The fourth quintile went ahead and took 4 steps forward. There we go. And the highest quintile took 10 steps forward. 10 steps forward. And so that's what this looks like on a graph. But it's a pretty big difference, don't you think? Yeah. And so let's go ahead and break that top quintile out further. So I'm going to need one more volunteer. So Chris, because you're out there, you get to pick someone. Anyone? There, Judy Kimmer. Thank you. And so Judy Kimmer is going to go ahead and represent the top 5%. Income for this group grew 73%. So she's going to go ahead and take 15.5 steps forward from the starting line. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. And so we're going to go ahead and repurpose Chris here And so just pretend she's still standing right there, right near the front of the aisle. And we're going to go ahead and break that top quintile down even more to the top 1%. This group gained 169%, which is 34 steps forward. Okay, and while Chris is walking, believe it or not, the calculation of the folks who put this exercise together, as Chris makes it out I'm not sure. Okay, so she is outside of the sanctuary. Believe it or not, that calculation only includes income from work. That doesn't include capital gains income, which is income from wealth. Believe it or not. I mean, I had to move over here to see Chris.
I think we better give them a break on how much their capital gains.
Perhaps. So let's go ahead and talk about wealth. So if everyone can come back and take a seat, please. So wealth is, so let's go ahead. So we've been talking about income. So income is money you get in exchange for your labor, for selling something, for cashing your government check or a dividend check or interest. But let's go ahead and talk about wealth. Wealth is assets minus liabilities or debt. Simply put, it's what you own minus what you owe. And believe it or not, it's possible to have negative wealth. So 17% of the population in 2007 had no or negative assets. Assets can include cash in a savings account, checking account, a car, a house, a small business, a retirement fund, even artwork and collectibles. And for this exercise, I've got 3 empty chairs, so I need 3 more volunteers. This is the last of the volunteers, so this is your last moment. No, 3 more volunteers, Jennifer. Oh. Okay.
3 more people.
3 more folks. This is easy. Come on up. Okay. So, the volunteers here, they're all sitting down. We have 10 chairs out. And they represent, each represent 10% of the population now instead of 20% of the population in our previous example. So we saw income grow immensely in the past 30 years for some people, and it shrank for others. But if we're looking at wealth, this is what wealth would look like if it were evenly distributed. And believe it or not, wealth has never been evenly distributed in this country. But we're going to go ahead and take this as a starting point. But to go ahead, in 2007, the top 10% owned 71% of all private wealth. So going to be top 10% is here, so we're going to have her come down to the side, and all of you, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 chairs from here down. You got these 3 chairs to share. Come on, get cozy. Go ahead and just stand in front of them. So Chris very nicely goes ahead and gets these 7 chairs to herself. So she gets nice and cozy and comfortable. And the rest of the volunteers, they're representing those 3 chairs. Just 1 second. So, but even within the top 10%, there's still great disparity, which has increased over the past 3 decades. In 2007, the richest 1% owned 34% of all the wealth, or 3.5 chairs. Excuse me, Chris. So, very nicely, I get these 3.5 chairs to myself. And if you know what, I don't even get all the way to the end on these chairs, and I'm not a short guy. So the top 1% went ahead and owned a population piece that's owned the piece of wealth that's the same as the bottom 90% combined. So just take a look at this for a second. Okay? Okay. Cool. Thank you all of our volunteers for getting all nice and cozy together. I appreciate that. And just give me that. Okay. And so just to review, we have income has been really unequal in the last 30 years, but that wasn't the case 30 years prior. And income has become more centralized among the richest Americans, and wealth is also really heavily concentrated among the wealthiest Americans. And there's a caveat here, which is, another chart of that. A caveat here, this is Americans as a whole on average, and it doesn't hold for people of color. The income and wealth gaps that existed between white people and people of color that existed in 1979 still continue on today. So, to paraphrase a great novel by George Orwell, all pigs are created equal, but some pigs are more equal than others. So, of course, to many of us, this inequality where I get 3.5 chairs and Chris gets to walk all the way back there seems really unfair on the face of it, but it really matters for other reasons. And to explore that, why it matters, we're going to watch part of it on a talk by Richard Wilkinson. He's a British epidemiologist who studies social inequality, its impacts on health and other measures of well-being. And he's a professor emeritus at the University of Washington. And here's his TED Talk.
Look at the evidence, we can compare societies, more and less equal societies, and see what inequality does. I'm going to take you through that data. I'm not using any hypothetical data. I'm taking data from the UN, it's the same as the World Bank has, on how much richer the top 20% than the bottom 20% in each country. We collected data on the kind of problems that are more common at the bottom of the social ladder, on life expectancy, on kids' maths and literacy scores, on infant mortality rates, homicide rates, proportion of the population in prison, teenage birth rates, obesity, mental illness, which includes drug and alcohol addiction, and social mobility. We put them here all in one index, and there you see it in relation to the measure of inequality I've just shown you. The more unequal countries doing worse on all these kinds of social problems. It's an extraordinarily close correlation. But if you look at that same index of health and social problems in relation to GNP per capita, gross national income, there's nothing there. No correlation anymore. We also looked in the UNICEF Index of Child Wellbeing. It has 40 different components. It contains whether kids can talk to their parents, whether they have books at home, what immunization rates are like, whether there's bullying at school. Everything goes into it. Here it is in relation to that same measure of inequality. Kids doing worse in the more unequal societies. Highly significant relationship. But once again, if you look at that measure of child well-being in relation to national income per person, there's no relationship, no suggestion of a relationship. This is the percent of the population with any mental illness in the preceding year. This is violence. These red dots are American states and the blue triangles are Canadian provinces. This is the proportion of the population in prison. And the more unequal societies are more likely also to retain the death penalty. Here we have children dropping out of high school. This is social mobility. It's actually a measure of mobility based on income. Basically, it's asking, do rich fathers have rich sons and poor fathers have poor sons? Or is there no relationship between the two? And at the more unequal end, father's income is much more important. In the UK, USA, and in countries, the Scandinavian countries, father's income is much less important. There's more social mobility. If Americans want to live the American dream, they should go to Denmark.
Okay. So one of the reasons we wanted to show that video was, well, I thought it was interesting for a lot of reasons, but I think we all have a sense, most of us have a sense of unfairness about inequality, but that was an eye-opener to me personally in terms of just the truly insidious nature of inequality over long periods of time in societies. Now, I don't know how well folks could see or hear. I will say when we're videotaping this today, and we'll post the videotape, and we'll post a link to this video. That's only about half of his talk, actually. So if you didn't catch all that or you want to see the rest of it, we'll send out the link. No, wrong way. There we go. We just did that. Okay. You can go to chapter 3. Chapter 3. So before we go on, I'll just say one other thing. In the latter part of that video, which we cut off, one of the points that he makes is it doesn't matter, they have found, how you get a more equal society. In other words, there are societies where people kind of make similar incomes. There's not a lot of difference in income. And there are societies where there's difference, but then social policies even that out afterwards, right? Redistribute or provide public benefits in a way that makes folks more equal. And when they looked at the different ways that states or countries achieved equality, it really didn't matter how you go about it. All that matters is that you create a more equal society, and then you see the benefits that he outlines. He also gets into more of the data and the caveats about causality versus correlation. So if folks are interested in that, you can watch the rest of the video. So the next thing we want to do is to start to tell the story. And boy, Nick and I spent a lot of time on this part because it's very hard to tell the story of how we got here. So what we decided to do was tell it in 3 parts. And Nick's going to start by telling the story as he sees it. Then we're going to have another video, and some random Scottish guy is going to tell us part of the story. For some reason, white men from the British Isles were the only people we could find to explain ourselves to us. I don't know why. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the story. So we'll break it into 3 parts.
Are we on? Okay. So as Jennifer mentioned, we spent some time trying to hash out this whole story. We initially first started writing the story at the end of October, and then we were looking at using curriculum, and we decided it wasn't the right fit for UC, so we went into a restaurant with nice big tables, and we talked for probably two hours ago. We were just trying to figure things out, and then we went back and we were trying to say, what is the whole story? What is everything that is encompassing this? And we came to the conclusion that we have 90 minutes here today, and this isn't a college class where I have 15 weeks, 4 hours a week to go ahead and have you know what the whole story is, and then we can follow on with another term
with a semester, and another term with another class to continue to study this. It's a big issue, and there's lots of levers involved. So we're going to tell one story as I see it, what I see the important historical events and changes that happened. And as we mentioned, Jennifer's going to go ahead and tell another story, as well as our Scottish guy. So the U.S. economy really boomed after World War II. But this is kind of a result, this is an oddity in history. It's really a result of some really particular circumstances. After World War II, many countries, their productive capacity, their factories, and their other ways of making things were reduced to rubble. The U.S., luckily, with the exception of Hawaii, was untouched by World War II, at least in a physical capacity. The U.S. factories coming out of World War II were well-oiled engines of manufacturing. We figured out really well how to make stuff during World War II because we had to. So this put the U.S. at an advantage. Its factories were working very well, and the rest of the world didn't have the ability to make a lot of stuff. And they needed to buy some things, at least from us, as basics that they wanted to go ahead and rebuild. At the same time, I think a really important part of the story is to look how information flowed. Information flowed a whole lot more slowly. Back at that time, the news cycle was once a day. You had a daily newspaper and the evening news that ran half an hour. Communication, if you were in a business perspective, if you needed real time, all you had was the telephone or the telegram. Paper documents, if you had to move a paper document around, that was sent via the mail or a courier. And the result of this, the result of information not moving really quickly, is things stayed local. Your spending, what I went ahead and spent, was my neighbor's income. And there was a direct link, and we both had our similar interests with each other. And at the same time, the financial industry was local. My banker that I went ahead and got a mortgage from, if I ever did get a mortgage, is local in the community. He works there. He is making an investment in a neighborhood that he understands personally because he's been there. And so that's where we started out with. And a lot of people say, let's go right back there. But let's talk a little bit more about that. So globally, as time went on, other countries rebuilt from the war. They developed their internal economies, and they just had greater capacity to produce stuff. We saw Japan, Germany, France, and England. They recovered from the war, and other countries became competitors, such as China, India, Brazil. They began to enter the marketplace in the 1970s, and new countries still enter our marketplace today. At the same time, information began to move more quickly. Our media, we had 24-hour news and cable television that was just, if you want to watch something at 3 in the morning, there's something to watch at 3 in the morning. In the business world, communication started moving faster. We had overnight delivery, faxes, and the internet and email. And this makes things global. My spending is the income of someone across the country or across the planet. I can go down the street and buy something from China really easy, and I don't even think about it anymore. And that's someone else's income over in China. So at the same time, while income is moving around, the financial industry becomes national and global. Deregulation, as well as the faster flow of information, makes this happen. So we have all these other producers that are entering the economy, both as a result of coming out of war and as a result of developing their own economy and wanting to export. And then the information media, we have national media, which goes ahead and develops national brands. It makes it easier to gather wealth. So at the same time, what we're seeing here is how much work pay goes ahead and erodes, and making wealth pay gets a whole lot easier. So we see wealth is suppressed by foreign competition, which I've mentioned before. Increases in productivity, so that the green line there is increases in productivity. So we see productivity increase, but average wages stay pretty flat. And the red line is average income of the top 1%. So, and we also see increases in transient work. People who are going on a contract to work 9 months to do this one thing for this company, or they're being brought in as a temporary employee. This helps companies because it reduces their non-productive time, how much they have to pay people, but it also reduces wages and benefits that people are paid. So while this is happening, wealth is getting depressed. Wages are getting depressed, but wealth is getting easier. Deregulation, which first starts with allowing banks to merge across state lines, and we get then they also get to merge into commercial banks, investment banks, and insurance companies all merge all together. So the faster flow of information makes new exotic types of trading available, and then we have new corporate structures, leveraged buyout funds, that allow wealth to get together and compound upon itself. So we have all these changes happening. I went looking for leveraged buyouts, and it's a fact of the 80s. Really, I mean, they went ahead and looked at a couple things. Oh, this happened here in the 50s, but most of it happened in the 80s, that wealth became in these big piles of money. But the thing is, while all this is happening, while wages are going down and wealth is going up, it's hard to notice. And why that's hard to notice is prices go down. If my wages go down and prices go down, I really can't notice because I can still buy the same amount of stuff. I can still buy the same milk, the same eggs, etc. At the same time, credit gets easier. We get to have a whole lot of credit coming in. And this enables Americans to really engage in just a love of housing and buying housing. And this creates a housing bubble. And this was helped by connecting money, these big piles of money, to homeowners via Wall Street. And so to really demonstrate this, I'm going to need a couple volunteers, 2 volunteers at first. If I can get 2 people. Jimmy? Chris? Great. You can go to the other side. Okay. So this is the old way of how a mortgage was done. So the homeowner, Judy, wants here to go ahead and buy a bank. Actually, can I get you 2 to switch spots? Thank you. So Judy wants to go ahead and buy a home, and she goes to the Chris, the mortgage banker, and says, "Hey, I want to buy a home." And the mortgage banker says, "Great, I know your community. I'm going to go ahead and lend you some money. And going to go ahead and lend you some money, and you can buy that house." Now, the thing is that mortgage, Chris goes ahead and keeps that mortgage, and she holds on to it. So she has a vested interest in making sure that Judy's able to repay that because she lives in the same community. But so the loan stays local. So, but we have a big change that really happens right around the early 2000s. And to demonstrate that, I need 2 more volunteers. 2 more folks. Come on up. Alan, thank you. And in this way, so Alan, right here for me. The other side, please. Great. And so we have this, it becomes more, there are more things going on here. So it starts out the same way. So Judy wants to go ahead and buy a house. And she goes to Chris and says, hey, Chris, I want to buy a house. Chris goes ahead and loans her the money and takes the mortgage in return. So now the other thing, instead of Chris holding on to this, what she goes ahead and does is she goes ahead and sells this to an investment banker and takes a fee. She gets some money, and she doesn't own the mortgage anymore. Let's pretend this sheet of paper is the mortgage. So it's over here now. Now, Alan over here owns the mortgage, and he goes and says, well, I borrowed some money to buy this mortgage, but I don't want to hold on to it. I want to repay my loan to buy that mortgage. So he goes and finds investors, the great graphic, which shows, just your average teacher, your average person who's, has a retirement fund, older people with retirement funds, as well as just other people who basically trade on wealth, and they go ahead and they give money to Alan to go ahead and buy those mortgages. And so Alan gets a fee. So now the question is, where's the risk? So this guy over here, I missed his name, Keith over here is way over here from Judy. It might not even be in the same country, let alone the same state. Okay? And so this really spreads the risk out. So where the risk used to be just right here, and the banker used to be in the same community, it's actually gone ahead and spread out a little bit more, that everyone has just said, oh, I've taken my fee, I'm good. I've taken my fee, I'm good. And so this really pushes risk out. At the same time, our investor here, Keith, wants more of these mortgages. And because we can't find anyone, we start thinking things like, hey, the plant, it needs a house and a mortgage. And we just find money to go ahead and really loan anywhere we can. And what this does is this drives this whole system. It puts a lot of money into the system, it gets folks to spend, and it results in a massive feedback loop and massive amounts of debt. And so what happens is this goes ahead and crashes, and results in some calls for austerity and reduced spending. And at this point, our volunteers, thank you very much. Thank you. And so at this point, we're going to go ahead and we've got a video to elaborate a little bit more on that and talk some more about austerity, the bubble. This is another gentleman from the UK. His name is Mark Blythe. He's no relation to Laurie, as far as I know. And he is, while he's from the UK and a Scottish gentleman, he's actually spent a lot of his academic life in the US, and he's a faculty member at Brown University. So, Mark Blythe.
2 years ago, the world's financial system exploded. The crisis blew a $2 trillion hole in financial space-time. And collectively, the rich governments of the world spent, lent, or guaranteed between 5 and 50% of their country's annual product saving the banks. Someone has to pay for it. And no one, especially the banks, wants to. So governments have to either increase taxes, difficult, or slash services, easier, especially when the policy has the common sense ring of virtue about it. Austerity. The pain after the party. But here's the kicker. The hangover of austerity is not going to be felt the same across the income distribution. Remember those folks in the bottom 40% of the income distribution that didn't really benefit from the financial boom? All they got was debt and the illusion of prosperity. They're the ones that actually use government services, those services that are about to be so virtuously consolidated. Those at the top end of the income distribution, those who made the mess in the first place, don't. Where those at the bottom end of the income distribution pay for those at the top with the same stagnant and skewed incomes that now buy less in a more unequal and unstable economy. Who pays and who doesn't? Those who made this mess won't, while those who already paid for it through the bailouts will pay again through austerity.
A little sad. Okay, so far does this story sound familiar? It's a long story. Okay. Well, I'm not going to start telling it over again, but what I wanted to do was add a few pieces that we haven't covered or that are particularly striking for me. So one is this idea of cutting government spending as a result of understandably alarming amounts of debt. And we've already been cutting back in Washington State. This shows the collective annual budget cuts in Washington State since the crash, since the recession in 2009. And it makes me heartsick personally to think about what that downward line means. Folks, I mean, you've read in the papers what we've cut, right? Income for people with disabilities, health insurance for children, teachers' salaries. And again, all of that kind of spending, as well as the 500,000 government jobs that have been cut nationally between all the governments, all of that is money that would normally go into the economy and be somebody else's income, right? That's kind of the point that random Scottish guy was making. Somebody has to be spending money. So that's one piece that resonates for me, and that I think we can see right here in our state legislature, which is in session right now. Think about that later when we get to possible solutions. I want to say here too, because it came up in our conversations a lot, we've been saying one person's expenditure is someone else's income, so you need to buy stuff. And I understand that part of the problem that we have is a kind of an obsession with consumerism or materialism. So when we say people need to buy stuff, I don't mean that in an unhealthy way. I simply mean even if we changed our relationship with consumption to one that was environmentally and spiritually and financially very healthy, some people would produce stuff and other people would buy it. So our point is simply that that has to be done in a way that is not going to destroy the environment, but we're always going to have consumption. The second thing that really blows my mind is, it doesn't want to talk to me. Is this point that Nick made. So before I go on, I'm sorry, I forgot about this. This is unemployment. So as a result of the fact that people can't spend money and one person's expenditure is someone else's income, and as a result of the bubble, there are 25 million people who are unemployed or underemployed. Here we go again. And once again, as we saw with income and wealth, people of color are disproportionately impacted, which has always been true, and it's even truer now that society as a whole is suffering more from unemployment. And the minimum wage, so that the second thing that strikes me, is the point that Nick made about how wages are stagnant and they pay less and less. And the minimum wage in this country, the national federal minimum wage, ours is higher in Washington, pays about $15,000 a year. Poverty, official poverty for a family of 4 is $22,000 a year for 4 people. So the minimum wage is well below poverty, and roughly a quarter of the children in this country are living under poverty. So the impacts, again, of all of this cutback on top of the recession are really particularly heartbreaking. Go ahead. So then we get to the work doesn't pay and wealth does. So we've accumulated these huge piles of money, and huge piles of money then make more money. So how many people saw the statistic this week when Mitt Romney, and I'm not going to a political place here, but saw about Mitt Romney's taxes and how he earned how much a day? $57,000 a day just off his wealth without working for any of that. The average income of an American family is $50,000 a year. So that in of itself is mind-boggling, but what's even more mind-boggling is that we have changed our tax structure in the last 30 years so that we've increased taxes on work and decreased taxes on wealth. So $1 that I make or any of you make working is taxed at a higher rate than one of those dollars that Mitt Romney made from his big pile of money. So that both seems to me exacerbates the inequality, right? You're just taking more money away from some people and letting the big piles of money get bigger. And it's also a value statement, right? A pretty loud value statement that we're making about what we value in the country. The next piece that I find particularly, and I'm sorry, I'm skipping around. Our state tax structure is also very, very screwed up. Washington State has the most regressive tax structure of all 50 states. And a regressive tax structure is one in which poor people pay proportionally more and the wealthiest people pay proportionately less. The reason our tax structure is so regressive primarily is because we don't have an income tax. That's in our Constitution for anyone who just moved here recently and wonders why that's so. Our state constitution prohibits an income tax, and so we rely very heavily on sales tax, right? And so the lower your income is, the bigger proportion of it you spend just on stuff to live on. And so by definition, then you're going to spend a higher proportion of your income on taxes than somebody who has a gajillion dollars. As Bill Gates Jr. once said, you can only buy so much hamburger. Hamburger is hamburger. Like at some point you have so much money you can't spend it. So our tax structure in the state is also very messed up. The fourth thing that I would piece to the story that I would add is a lot of the narratives that we went looking for to tell this story from other sources talked about the connection between organized labor and the health of the middle class, and particularly unions. And this graph, for folks who can't see the detail, shows from 1967 to the present time, the blue line is the proportion of income, I think it's the proportion of income earned by the middle 3 quintiles. Remember our quintiles? So take out the top 20 and the bottom 20. If you want to use those middle ones as a proxy for the middle class, their income goes down. And the red line is the rate of unionization of our labor force. Now, this is interesting to me because I know people have very different experiences of organized labor. Personally, I come from an immigrant family that benefited immensely from the labor movement. And my grandfather's generation were unionized steel workers, and my mom's generation were unionized building tradesmen. In our current life, my husband is a member of a public sector public sector union, and we've had very mixed experiences there. And I expect that's true of a lot of people, that people have mixed experiences. So the question of the role of organized labor in building an economy that works for everyone, I think is a complicated one in terms of the experiences that people bring. What I would say editorially is this. I took economics in college. How many people have taken an economics class ever at some point? I'm so sorry. Look at how many of you have. So I'm really bad at this. I almost failed economics in college, actually. But one thing I do remember is the idea that the economy has 3 components: labor, capital, and land. Do people remember that? Labor, capital, land, right? So if corporations, a business is a way that people can band together for the purposes of advancing their capital interests in the marketplace, right? You create an entity in which you can put your money together and create a business. That's what a corporation is. I'm a small business owner. I have done this. There is nothing wrong with it. So it seems only fair and appropriate in my mind that labor be able to do the same thing, that people whose place in the economy is as a laborer can band together in pursuit of their economic interests. Now, the institutions that come out of that banding together, be they corporations or unions, are human institutions and are going to be subject to all the flaws and foibles of humanity, just like religions and governments. So the fact that sometimes those institutions act in a way that we see as counter to the public good, to me, doesn't mean that you talk about getting rid of the institutions. When corporations violate the public trust and do things that harm us, we don't disband them. And yet there seems to be a lot of talk about disbanding unions among those who perceive that they are not acting in the public good. And in my mind, those are 2 separate things, right? The need in an economy for people to be able to represent their interests versus the behavior and the foibles of the institutions that are formed as a result of that are different. So that would be my personal take on that piece. But I wanted to call this out as part of the story because it is part of the story, and people are talking a lot about what is the role of organized labor, good or ill, in building an economy that works for us. The last thing that has really jumped out at me in telling this story has come from all of you, which, as I said, John and I have heard from many people about your opinions on this broad topic, and I have been struck by the fact that there are differences across generations in how people think about this constellation of issues in terms of what the sort of presenting window is for you, depending on how old you are, what stage of life you're in. So, for example, as if we look at changes in income and wealth over the last 30 years, young adults have done much worse than older adults. This graph shows that from 1984 to the recent year, the median net worth of households under 35 has actually dropped by 70%, while the median net worth of households over 65 has grown. Next slide. Poverty, see how poverty has changed. Younger adults have a rising line in terms of the level of poverty of young adult householders. Go ahead. And higher unemployment. So that's not to say that we want to create some rift between old people and young people, because then I also found a study that showed that in terms of the recession itself, adults between the age of 55 and 65 have fared the worst in the recession, because they may have lower rates of unemployment, but once someone in that age group loses their job, they're unemployed for a much longer time. They have a much harder time getting a job. So, and we hear from people who say, I thought I was going to retire, and now I have no idea how I'm going to do it. And if you lose your job, you can't get it back. And I've heard people say, and I know that there are 20-somethings who want me to get the heck out of my job so they can have it. So the point there is, I think there's one more slide. Oh, go on, you can skip that one. So the point I want to make there is that even though when I hear people talk about the economic mess, that the lens that they apply is often very shaped by where they are in life. But every generation has been badly affected. So in the end, it seems like if we're going to start to move towards trying to have more of an impact in terms of change, it would be necessary both to acknowledge and recognize those differing impacts across different groups of folks, and also find a way to make sure that we're still able to work in our common interest and see where all of our interests align in terms of wanting to make change. So that's the end of my story. So we had Nick's story, and we had Scottish Guy's story, and my story. Of sort of what happened and what are the pieces of it. I know that it's imperfect, and I know that all of you have a different story, as I said, or a tweaked one, or you're sitting there saying, oh, she didn't talk about Glass-Steagall or Citizens United or Citizens United. There's another big important piece, right? The amount of money that's going into politics. So that big, huge pile of money that people have collected, one of the places that the piles of money found to go was into the housing bubble, but another was into politics. Do we think those tax rates changed the way they did at random, just by chance? No, they changed because people lobbied for them. They lobbied for the deregulation. And so when we have a system where lots and lots of money is able to go into the political system, it naturally builds a set of policies that's going to continue to be better and better for them. Whereas the rest of us, who may be other people who are struggling under debt and low wages and see the government doesn't work for us, get more and more disengaged, and that becomes a vicious cycle. So all of you are going to have more and more pieces that you bring to the picture. What we wanted to do is lay that out, kind of maybe remind people of some of the pieces that aren't top of mind for you, and start to talk about how can we come back and begin to take action. And that's what we're going to do next week. So I'm going to come back to a question I posed at the beginning. What do you believe? What's your hypothesis about cause and effect in all of this? Because you can come up with one, right? Implicit, and I know people can't necessarily see all the detail here, but I'm going to talk about it. Implicit in the story that we told are causes of our problem. Any one of us might believe or not believe in some of these as legitimate causes to act on. If we had to pick a portfolio of them to attack first, all of us might pick a different set of them, right? It's not going to be one solution. It's going to be a lot of different ones. So some of the ways that we might think about acting are around the value of work. We talked a lot today about how work pays less and less. John said it in his sermon today. What did you say? It does not pay to work, basically. So rebuilding the value of work. How could that look? That might be tackling the minimum wage, getting it above poverty, looking at the causes of those persistent disparities along racial lines in income and wealth, coming to some agreement as a society about what a living wage is and whether everyone's entitled to some basic level of survival and thriving even. Organized labor. What is the role of organized labor in advocating for the worker, for the wage earner? And to the extent that we see that as a tool, how can it be a better one? Looking at the role of immigration and the labor rights of immigrants who come here and how the denial of those rights affects our economy and the well-being of the rest of us. We could look at addressing just the impacts of the mess on people's lives, unemployment, hunger relief, foreclosure relief. We could look at what government can do, right? So Scottish Guy said, government's the only place that has money right now. And we could have gone into the debt, and we talked about going into the debt actually today as a topic and set it aside. But people are concerned about the debt, but the Scottish Guy told us government's the only place with money. So instead of cutting, Maybe we want to see government investing in a way that actually builds jobs, not giving everybody a $50 a week or a month tax break, which might help you pay your bills, but isn't necessarily going to create a lot of jobs, right? Because what if what you use that for is buying more stuff from China, for example? So is it possible for government to invest in infrastructure, in renewable energy, in education, in things that build and sustain our society for the long haul and create jobs? Are there things we could cut? You know, if we didn't show the pie charts of the federal deficit, but a big chunk of it is from war. Maybe there's some things we could cut. Healthcare spending. We spend I don't know, the percentage of our GDP that goes to healthcare, and yet, you know, we have some of the worst health outcomes of any of the developed world. So containing healthcare spending, looking at some of the generational and structural issues and how we pay for Social Security, for example. So we could look at what we want government to do in terms of investing. We could tackle the deregulation of the financial industry, reseparating consumer and investment banking, just finding ways to make sure that risk resides where it ought to reside in the system, making big banks smaller, trying to force some accountability for the people who created the housing bubble. We could work on fixing our tax structure, making it more equitable either at the federal level or the state level, and making sure that governments have enough money to pay for the basic common services that we as a society want. We could look at stemming the influence of money in democracy. I do get a lot of emails about corporate personhood. I know that a lot of you care about that. Campaign finance reform, government accountability. There are global issues around trade, which I don't understand, but people could tackle those. And there's always an element of all of this that's about personal behavior and attitudes. Not just ours, yours and mine, but society's. Overconsumption, this attachment to materialism, that would have to change. You could fix an awful lot of policy things, but if you don't tackle some of these issues, the culture of our healthcare system with its emphasis on testing and drugs and things that cost a lot of money, this sort of short versus long-term mindset that got us into a lot of the debt problem, civic and democratic engagement, just people participating. So even if we got government to do a whole lot of things, we also need people as a whole to do some things too, right? And that's something that we could tackle. So here's what we want, and there's more. This is just, you know, the list that I called from the way that we told the story. So here's what we want to do. We're creating this container for this conversation here at this church because we heard that people wanted to have it. And again, look how many of you came. Next Saturday, we're going to have a session from 9:30 to 2:30. It's not the last opportunity, I don't think. But what we're going to do there is we're going to hear each other's stories some more. You're all going to talk to each other. We are going to spend a little bit more time in a teaching mode talking about how social change happens in societies broadly. So in other words, 3 things have to happen for society to change its viewpoint on something. People have to become aware that there is a problem. People have to understand and oppose the root of the problem. And people have to embrace the alternative, because often even when we know there's a problem, we're afraid of the alternative. So next week, we're going to get concrete. We're going to talk about, well, how does society change? How do we make social change? Where do we think we're at in that cycle with some of these issues that we care about? And what are some tools that you can use to go from a really big problem to an issue that could be tackled to a strategy that you could deploy on people that actually have the power to make change. And we're going to be joined in that by one of the community organizers from the Sound Alliance. And then what we plan to do is have folks surface in that group 4 or 5 topics that people want to dig into deeply. And then we'll have a good chunk of time, like an hour and a half for in each of those topical groups to dig in and to follow that method of, okay, what do we think that we could do on this? Maybe the next step is we need more information because these are complicated. But the goal is for whatever topics you all pick, for those groups to come out with some next action steps that people are willing to take. Will it work? Maybe. It'll depend on all of you and what you bring and who else comes. But that's the goal for next week. And so out of that, there may be additional conversations and additional get-togethers, depending on what people want to do. So your assignment, if you're coming back next week, is to think about what you believe about cause and effect and what levers you would try to pull and push to make things better. And your assignment before you leave today, actually, is to give us a little insight into that, if you will. Did you mind passing those out? Before you go. So I'm going to hand it over to John at the end for some closing comments, but what we're passing out is just a short survey, and there should be pencils in the pews, just asking you, are you coming next Saturday, yes or no, or if you know, and regardless, are there 2 or 3 things that you would really like to see us, this community, dive into in terms of issues? You're not committing yourself to those issues, you're not committing the group, it will just give us a little bit of a sense of where people's heads are at and maybe help us to plan that session a little more. So if you are willing before you go, and I think I only made 100 copies. So when I hand it over to John, which tells you what I was expecting. So well, after John says his last words, I can go, closing words, I can make a few more copies, but. On up there. Well, we can, oh, and the last thing is we will this week, we'll send out a link in the e-news. We are going to try our level best to get a video of this up, along with all of these slides, so fret not if you want the slides, and links to those other videos, as well as the links to John's last 2 sermons. So, I know. All right, so thank you very much for your attention. We will get more of those little sheets so we can hear back from you. I hope that this gave folks some food for thought. I hope everybody learned some fact that you didn't know before you came in and some different way of thinking about it. And then, if I can, I'd like to ask John to say some closing words for us.
Yes, I agree. We need to thank Jennifer and Nick for their leadership in bringing all of this to us. Our attempt today was just to begin to get our arms around what's a big beast, and hopefully are sitting together quietly. You've been very respectful and listening to a lot of talking to you today. We appreciate that. Next Saturday is a day when we get down and dirty. How about that? Down and dirty. Well, I alluded to it in the second service. In the singing of the Bread and Roses, and I'm aware how much this is an issue of generations. What I remembered was my great-grandmother, whose husband died in a railroad accident, and how she became a single mother of 5 kids and really had to leave them alone most of the time for them to tend to themselves. There was no Social Security, no social insurance, and work as a cook and live in a cold water flat, keep one of her kids home. My dad was a Teamster for 50 years, and he was well aware of the corruption in the unions, but he was also aware, at least in the Teamsters Union, that had it not been for the union, the quality of his life would have been far less than it was. And I think of my daughters who are coming out of college, and fortunately they're not in this position, but there are many of their peers who graduate with $150,000, $200,000 in debt to begin their lives this way. And those of us who have had the benefits of higher education, I wonder how many of us started our professional lives that way. So you can see the quality of despair among some of the younger people. And as Jennifer said, this isn't a generational war, but it's just a way of opening up many of the windows in this big project. Sharon Welch, who is a Unitarian ethicist, reminds us that the work for justice is the work of generations. It's not something we do after all the bills have been paid, when we have a little extra time, something like a hobby, to round out an otherwise satisfactory life, but that the work for justice is an essential part of our gratitude for the gift of life. So today, as you came through the line, I was particularly aware of the young people. So let us commit ourselves to this work, not for us alone, but for them and for the earth. Thanks for coming. Bye-bye.